The politics and governing bodies of America have historically negatively impacted the lives of African Americans to a great extent. Throughout the history of America, people of color have endured the hardships of institutionalized slave labor, discrimination, and segregation instilled by the governing bodies of America. However, in recent memory, due to the continuous immigration and opportunity present in the United States, American politics, in addition to all other sectors of American society, have increasingly become more diverse in terms of race, upbringing, and background. I decided to research African American politics and politicians and their impact on American politics because it not only displays the substantial amount of social progress that has taken place in American society, but because it allows people of color and people of differing socioeconomic upbringings to have the opportunity to make changes and improve the well-being of those who are currently enduring the same struggles that they did. And while American society is not perfect, the racial tensions and a constant division due to differing political opinions still very much existent and present, the educational, vocational, political, and even marital opportunities for all people living in the United States, no matter what race or ethnic background they are from, has never been more present. And race relations are arguably still better now than they have ever been before. Politicians of African American background today are not only contributing to African American history, but to the history of the United States and the world in general, as those who shared the same skin color as these politicians of the past would have historically been hindered because of the lack of opportunity and institutionalized oppression against African Americans. Perhaps the most notable politician who was a person of color was the 44th President, Barack Obama. The election of Barack Obama was a major turning point in the entire history of the United States, as he was the nation's first ever president who was a person of color. People of color throughout the entire United States rejoice as a nation historically ridden and stained with history of racism, discrimination, division, theft, and murder can now be seen as a country of progress and unity among people of all backgrounds. African Americans in particular rejoiced to a great extent as they now felt that the president was now someone who has experienced the same discrimination and struggle due to the color of their skin. Many African Americans felt that the Barack Obama was finally someone who could now truly empathize with them and implement assistive policies that could transform their lives from the struggle and hardships that African American families have suffered from for generations. But even more notably, Barack Obama's election allowed for African Americans in a country historically ridden and stained with history of racism, discrimination, division, theft, and murder, the freedom and desire to strive for bigger dreams. It allowed for even a dream as big as becoming the President of the United States. Despite this major turning point in American history, the election of an African American president did very little to change the lives and well-being of many struggling African American families, as what was previously thought would happen. Employment numbers, crime rates, homicide rates, and poverty rates in the majority of African American communities across the country saw little to no improvements throughout the 8-year term of President Obama. President Obama failed to implement any policies that could have potentially assisted these specific communities. President Obama also failed to offer sufficient funding to schooling and education in impoverished colored communities, which could have had a major impact on the lives of young racial minorities. President Obama's 8-year term was a sheer disappointment for impoverished, struggling African American communities. This disappointment stems from how many initially thought that a liberal and progressive politician like Barack Obama, who was also a person of color, would provide assistance to those in need through more affirmative action policies and government programs for the impoverished colored communities. On the opposite end of the political spectrum, there are an increasing number of African Americans who hold more conservative views that differ greatly from those of President Obama and the African American Democrats in Congress. While the number of African American conservatives is minuscule compared to that of liberal African Americans, their presence and opinion is still very clear and apparent due to how unusual such a differing political opinion is in the African American community. African American Republicans such as Larry Elder, Ben Carson, and Thomas Sowell go on to argue the importance of self-responsibility and personal choices without any kind of aid from the government. They argue that there is no institutionalized racism or discrimination present in American society today, which strongly opposes the liberal opinion. African American conservatives also argue that the implementation of policies like affirmative action are divisive as it prioritizes race over merit. In conclusion, researching and learning about African Americans and their impact on American politics deeply interests and moves me for a number of reasons. 1. I believe in equal and fair opportunity for all. And when it comes to politics in particular, representation of the diverse communities of the U.S. is deeply important since people from these specific communities know those communities and their struggles best. Secondly, I believe that if us as Americans want to reach true unity, we must continue to take steps in finding common ground through civil discourse and politics that works for and benefits everyone in society. We must stop trying to find ways in which we are different, whether that be race, gender, religion, or political opinion. Because when it is all said and done, we are all humans, and we all desire the same thing: life, liberty, fairness, and happiness.